Muy buenos días a todos.
Good morning to everyone. We're going to begin the inaugural session of this international conference. We are all Nazarenes on persecuted Christians. Her Excellency, the Mayoress, Ombudswoman, other authorities, His Excellence, and the Reverend Bishops who are here. Dear attendees at this, we are all Nazarenes conference. Right now I'm asking myself, or I wonder whether we haven't lost our ability to feel compassion. We are living in civilized societies which say that they are tolerant, sensitive to problems that cause social inequality, the problems that affect the weakest and the least favored, and the breach of human rights all over the world. But, however, these civilized societies in the West are not moved by the tragic situations that are being suffered by Christians who are cruelly persecuted for their faith in countries such as Iraq, Syria, Nigeria, Kenya, and Egypt. In many other places, such as Pakistan, Christians cannot openly demonstrate their faith. They are subject to unfair laws, tortured, and forced to deny their faith in public, and if they do not do so, they are executed. The repercussion of these breaches or this violation of human rights in Europe is practically non-existent. Here in the West, we are able to cry because of a film which talks about the genocide carried out by the Nazis 70 years ago, but however, we remain unaffected by this other genocide, which is being carried out right now before our very eyes. A genocide which we can witness in real time thanks to the media and the immediacy of internet and social networks. The martyrs of today are being publicly and savagely assassinated, decapitated, crucified, burnt alive, stoned and thrown off cliffs. And their bodies are displayed as like trophies. Children, old people, women, teenagers, taken away from their beloved families and their homes. They're taken to the slaughterhouse on trucks, like cattle. They've ruined their lives. They've put an end to their lives, taking away all dignity. And nonetheless, they remain faithful to Christ right to the very last moment. Whilst in the West, we remain silent. Cowardly silence. Our opulent societies only react if the brutality of terrorism, of the jihads, takes place at home. Then we go out onto the streets, greatly worried, in a state of shock, to put candles in the streets and to share banners on the social networks in solidarity with the dead. Je suis Charlie. I want to believe that this is not the highest level of our compassion, although sometimes it's difficult to convince ourselves that this is not the case. The recent attacks in Paris showed the great hypocrisy of the Western world. The Western world shudders when the most brutal terrorism takes action within its borders, but remains silent and unmoved when the dead people are others. If anything has become clear with the jihadist phenomenon is that that for the most developed countries in the world, there are first-class and second-class deaths. The 12 people who were assassinated in Charlie Hebdo are worth more than the 21 Coptic Egyptians who were decapitated on the beaches of Libya, or more than the 148 Christian youths who were massacred at the Kenyan University in Garissa, more than the thousands of innocent people which Boko Haram have forced to leave their villages and cities in the north of Nigeria, much more than the victims of the atrocities of the Islamic State or of Al-Qaeda in Syria or in Iraq. But we must not deceive ourselves. It's not just a question of geographical distance, which makes a difference between the first and second category deaths. There's an adjective which brings together all of these victims, which is not politically correct in the West, the Christian faith of all of them. When the terrible news of the massacres in Syria and Iraq began to arrive, many Western media deliberately hid the fact that those victims were essentially Christians. Still today, after so much blood has been shed, few media have highlighted the fact that the jihadism has a worldwide purpose which was first appeared in the Near East, to eradicate all traces of Christianity from the face of the earth. Just a few weeks ago, for example, an Australian newspaper blamed the Nigerian Christians for one of the most bloody attacks of Boko Haram. In Spain, a socialist MP said that what happened in Garissa in Kenya was not a crime against Christians, but rather it was a consequence of a war of religions in Kenya, placing the Christian students at the same level as their executors. These are isolated examples, but they have a shared or a common denominator, which is being repeated in a systematic way in this Western world, which is dominated by secularism, relativism, and moral equidistance. Within these new values and political correction, Christians cannot appear to be victims. If Western society does not react, if the media perverts the information in order to be politically correct, why will governments take action? Are we not talking about the reflection of a society which has voted for them, representatives of citizens who are indifferent to the human drama of thousands of people who are assassinated, tortured, raped, sent from their homes and humiliated? The response of Western governments to this jihadist horror has been in line with the ethic and moral standards of the societies they represent. An uncertain or undefined response in its ways, which is ambiguous in its contents, late in arriving and very inefficient. Despite the constant demands for or requests for help from humanitarian organizations, bishops and religious leaders and international observers, international commitment has been reduced to great speeches whose only real effects which have practically no real effects in the field. We cannot be proud of the response that's been given in the West, nor of the passiveness of the Spanish government, which often hides behind international institutions or behind the EU regulations in order to take a low-profile and passive approach when it's necessary to defend the human rights of persecuted Christians. The Christians in Syria, Iraq, Nigeria and Egypt, and from so many other parts of the world, have a legitimate feeling of neglect. You have sufficient reasons to believe that the international community has turned its back on you. Your call for help, no doubt, expected a lot more from the Western world, which represents the greatest heights of civilization known in the history of humanity. The high values which inspire our constitutions and our supranational agreements, which are a guarantee of freedom, equality, justice and respect for human rights, have not been up to or have not met the needs of this humanitarian crisis which is being caused by Islamist fanaticism. From our platforms, which involve citizens from Haz de Oír, Citizen Go, we have wanted to really face this silence in order to say that you are not alone. You are not alone because there are many citizens in the West who are horrified and worried about your destiny and committed to helping, because it is also our destiny. There are people like this in Spain and in other countries, and of course in organizations that I've mentioned and on behalf of which I speak right now. We want to say here and now that we are working, and we will work day by day, tirelessly, to make people understand, to make people aware of your suffering, your pain, and then your need for help. We also are going to promote international actions which will put a stop to the Islamic extremism which is threatening our lives, the security and safety of our beloved families and friends, and even the survival of our culture and your culture itself. As committed citizens, we have wanted to no longer wait for others to take a step. We want to look at what we can do to change the situation. And the result is today's conference, the international conference, We Are All Nazarenes, which thankfully has been able to take place today. With this, we take responsibility for increasing awareness amongst public opinion in the West of the great human tragedy and the tragedy for civilization which is being suffered by Christians. We are aware that without awareness there will be no mobilization, and without mobilization our governments will not be sensitive, nor will give any response to this very serious situation that you are suffering. And for this reason we want this conference to be a unique opportunity to make sure that the world hears from the true people who are suffering this persecution, the direct victims of the shedding of blood, of those who are witnesses to these atrocities and can tell the West what is happening in person, to tell us about the drama and the suffering of our Christian brothers and sisters, those who are risking their life to maintain this 1,000-year culture which is suffering from widespread lack of interest. We trust that your testimonies will have a great impact. Your message will reach the society and help it to wake up, understand and react. We are convinced that the governments will become involved in this battle against jihadism when they feel the pressure of their citizens, and it's only then when they will cease to be silent accomplices of this extermination. And lastly, I want to state that it's not just about helping states which are being persecuted, or people who are being persecuted. It's also about honouring the sacrifice of martyrs. Rather than a necessity, this is a moral duty. And if the West leaves this genocide in oblivion, then the evildoers will have won, and the sacrifice of these innocent people will have been in vain. This conference wants to make you feel our warmth, our respect and our admiration of all of you who have helped to prepare this and who have wanted to come to listen to these testimonies. People have come from Spain, from Europe and from all around the world. With the help of God and with the infinite power of prayer, I trust that we will be able to fulfill our objective, to increase awareness in society, mobilize governments and find a long-lasting way in which to help to eliminate hate, to heal these wounds and to bring peace and prosperity back to these regions so that Christians can resume their lives in freedom at the same point at which they were suspended due to these attacks of the senseless jihadism. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Mrs. Soledad Becerril, the Ombudswoman for the Spanish state, is going to say a few words now. Thank you very much. Mrs. Mayoress of Madrid, Chairman of the conference, the International Conference on Religious Liberty, Hazte Oír, Patriarchate of Antioquia, the representatives of the Orthodox Church, evangelical ministers, church authorities, the family of Asia Bibi. I want to particularly mention them, as well as the family of Kayla Muela. Ladies and gentlemen, freedom of conscience and religion is known and valued in many places as the most precious of all freedoms. The fight for its recognition has, for a long time, been something which has existed, and there are many conflicts and much suffering which takes place as a result of its defense. It was the first freedom recognized in the year 313 in Milan, and it put an end to the religious wars of the centuries of the 16th century in Central Europe. And it was this freedom which was most valued when the founders of the North American country wanted to create a country free of intolerance and persecution. Jefferson, author of the Statute for Religious Freedom of Virginia in 1786, defended the concept of religious freedom in order to protect not just believers, Christians, Catholics, but also non-believers as well. And he expressed his support for full religious freedom as a necessary instrument in order to achieve democracy and a nation of free men and women. United Nations, the international organization, recognized the importance of the freedom of thought and religion in 1948 on the occasion of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which established, as you know very well, that all people have the right to the freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. The Declaration on the elimination of all kinds of intolerance and discrimination based on religion or beliefs and thoughts. This declaration from 1981 of the United Nations as well took a long time to achieve an agreement, and it is still not legally binding for the signing countries. But nonetheless, there exists a specific figure for religious freedom which presents an annual report before the UN, which talks about religious persecution which is taking place throughout the world. This rapporteur insists on the need to face all expressions and demonstrations of hate and for religious reasons, and to analyze the reasons behind it and the political aspects which aggravate it. Yesterday, we have listened to and seen the drama caused by this hate on the high seas, where people, on the basis of their beliefs, are thrown overboard on the high sea, abandoned by people who have other religious beliefs. And hate brings them to throw these other people overboard when at sea. And this is something we have seen. We're talking about the extremes of intolerance. And they take place in which countries where respect for religious belief and the freedom to practice religions are completely absent. Many Christians are suffering right now a real persecution in countries where there is a Muslim majority. And it seems that we have become accustomed to these news, these voices, and the voice of the Security Council of the UN. We seem accustomed to their weakness and the fact that we are accustomed to witnessing these atrocities. If we accept these attacks, even though we feel pain, but if we accepted them and silenced them, we would be becoming resigned to the fact that these intolerable crimes take place. I think that we have occasions, and we must use them. We have opportunities to express our rejection before international bodies, and this is one of the functions of the institution that I represent as Ombudswoman of Spain. We can do this before institutions and governments who remain silent, who tolerate these atrocities. I also believe that these Muslim communities and those of other beliefs who are respectful of others must raise their voices in order to make themselves heard. The defenders of human rights who exist in many countries, not just in the EU or in the Mediterranean or Latin America, they can play an important role in denouncing these problems and in defending people who practice their religion. The Institute of the Ombudsman's Office is also a defender of human rights, and it can contact these international institutions who are in charge of freedoms and rights. And this is what we have done, for example, in the case of the Pakistani woman, Asia Bibi. We have informed the United Nations. I did it personally and publicly. We have done this in different international fora. There are many communities and religious orders who are being persecuted on different continents. What is more, attention is not given to the work carried out by these religious communities and religious orders, what they do to help unprotected people, people who are in need of help and defense. They have a real vocation to serve in many cases. And in Spain, recently, we have seen the generous, valuable behavior of those who, when carrying out their work, their functions, have helped and assisted people who had caught Ebola, who had been infected with Ebola or Ebola. And there have been people amongst them who have died as a result of infection. In the democratic European countries, the fundamental rights are defended in Article 6 of the Constitution. The freedom of conscience, religion, and worship is defended for individuals and communities without any further limitations than those established by the law for public order as protected according to the law. No faith has a state-based nature, although it is taken to account that the majority of believing Spaniards follow the Catholic faith. Muslim communities must be our allies as well in our fight against persecution, violence and terror. No religious belief, none which respects freedom, can oppress or take revenge. The Ombudsman's Office protects and defends people who come to us to complain because they have not been able to freely practice their faith and beliefs, whether these may be from one faith or another. And we have taken action before different administrative bodies and even the General Prosecutor's Office. Ladies and gentlemen, a commitment to religious tolerance, religious practice and freedom of conscience means or represents a commitment with the dignity of human beings and the defense of the dignity of human beings and of justice as a fundamental value. And that is where the Spanish Ombudsman's Office must be and where I work to ensure that it is. And I repeat our commitment to this freedom of thought, conscience and religion and the defense of the dignity of all human beings. Ladies and gentlemen, I particularly thank you for your attention. Thank you.
A continuación.
We shall now hear from the Mayoress of Madrid, Mrs. Ana Botella. The Ombudswoman of Spain, the chairman of Ateoir, church representatives, and particularly the Patriarchate of Antioquia and the General Bishop of the Orthodox Church. I also want to particularly greet the parents of Kayla Moyla, who was so cruelly assassinated, murdered, and particularly the family of Asia Bibi, a Pakistani Catholic woman convicted to death for blasphemy in 2010. For the capital of Spain, for Madrid, it is a pleasure, it is an honor to welcome this conference. We are all Nazarenes. It brings together the cry for freedom of all of those who are persecuted in the 21st century, a voice to which this city, this free, tolerant, integrating city which shows solidarity, we join in that cry and we welcome you to the capital of Spain, which is a welcoming city. Right now, at this time of systematic attacks against Christian communities in many parts of the world, the conference which begins today is even more valuable, if possible. As has been said, the recent decapitation of Coptic people in Libya, or the anniversary of 1 year since the kidnapping of 200 children, young students, female students in Nigeria at the hands of the Islamic movement Boko Haram. They represent just a sample of the brutal attitude or the brutal behavior which we saw again yesterday. The brutal attacks that we suffer as Christians, all of these are actions which go against the very essence of human beings, because they attack the fundamental rights of people, particularly the right to have a life free of aggression and violence. Here, under the 18th article of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, we have religious freedom which is protected, but today it is a chimera for people today. It's a mirage. And this sometimes costs them their life. So therefore, we must once again recall that religious freedom is not just an idea or a desire. Quite the opposite. It is an unbreachable freedom for each person to be able to express and practice their faith in an individual or group way, both in public and in private. Those of us who believe, and we know how important our beliefs are, we know that we must respect the beliefs of the person in front of us, even though they may be different to our own. Please allow me to highlight that all of this, which seems obvious to us in Spain, is not so obvious in many parts of the world, particularly for Christians in countries such as Nigeria, Egypt, Syria, Iraq, Pakistan, Libya, North Korea, and those who suffer the attacks of terrorist groups who base their activity in religious extremism, which is a form of totalitarianism. We must not forget that. In the history of humanity, there have always been totalitarian regimes which have only brought misfortune to the world, and religious extremism is a form of totalitarianism. And for this reason, this conference here in Madrid is a focus for the free world, because if we are here today, it is to highlight the value of religious freedom without making any mistakes. All human beings, we ask questions of why, for what, where are we going? Some of us believe in the transcendental nature of the human being, others don't. But nonetheless, I believe that there are certain things that we must all share. And there is one which is shared, which must be shared, both if we think of the spiritual aspect of human beings, and for those people who ask those questions without the spiritual belief. But I think the shared factor is a respect for people and a respect for human dignity at all times. We know that Christianity has sheltered people who suffer. And whether we're talking about one belief or another, there are networks of people who demonstrate great generosity to sick people, to people who are alone, and right now, here, to people who here in Europe and in Spain and in many places in the world, people who are suffering the crisis in a particularly painful way. And we have many things in common, and all of us here, we share Jewish Christian roots, which are the source of Western society and civilization. There are rights and values and freedoms which must be defended. At this time of moral relativism, contain an answer to many questions. Values such as the defense of life and family, the vocation to serve the weak, a vocation to serve those who are at risk of being marginalized. I think that all of these are fundamental values. Friends, for Madrid, religious freedom forms part of our character. Madrid is a cosmopolitan city which is open to the world, always willing to welcome, to shelter people and their cultures and traditions. I know the solidarity of Madrid people. I am familiar with their respect and tolerance. The number of people who voluntarily help others on a daily basis, and the moral wealth of the morals of the people who live in our community in this region. So I celebrate that the Declaration of Madrid should be read. We are against religious genocide. We are against the terrorist activities of jihadist groups, and we encourage authorities and governments around the world to support those who suffer persecution. We cannot forget for 1 minute the crimes of religious genocide. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias, doña.
Thank you very much.